Qualicum or something like that.
Yeah, it's Qualicum Bay and it's Qualicum Beach.
What took you there, Neil?
I was 30 years in the city of
Qualicum
Vancouver.
Beach.
Yeah, Qualicum Beach, yeah. And and then I spent about 3 summers camping around British Columbia, and I needed a smaller place, and I realized I wanted to be close to the wild, and that's where I am. So it's the air is full of birds, and actually bears come right into town sometimes, and so on. So there's the odd cougar. I haven't seen one, thank God, yeah, I figured out that was what drew me. Was I wanted to be close to the wild, and some part of me needed to have that after 30 years in the city. So I can do my writing here and photography, and that's what I'm basically mainly doing. So and I write about Jungian themes too, and so on, and how the Jungian path has been a healing path for me. So that's over decades, and that's I'm trying to express that through my photography and my poetry and my writing in general. So I met Diane Croft here a couple of years ago. I don't know if you know that name, but she had a book out, and I had quite a profound experience with sharing that session with her 2 years ago. And so I've been communicating with her, and she's really encouraging of my writing and so on. So that's good.
Yeah, Skip actually had her on Wisdom Path Colloquia a Saturday, I think, about a year or so ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, that book is just powerful.
Yeah. Okay, I am personally having a small problem with my sound, and what's going on here? And I'm setting it differently so that I don't get a repeat sound. I was getting an echo here, but I think I might have resolved it. I'll see in about a minute if it plays back to me. But in any case, what we're going to do today is read and talk about the essay entitled "The Anchorite," which begins at page 241 of the Reader's Edition of the Red Book. And before we begin the actual body of the text, there are a couple of footnotes that I think we need to talk about, because this segment is heavily reliant upon text in the New Testament of the Bible, and that is John 1 through 14. And so I want to set the stage a little bit for my international followers, of which I have many, that this is referring back to this segment of the Bible. And so in any case, this event, this act of imagination of Dr. Jung, was occurring on December the 30th, 1913. So again, we're almost halfway through this book, and almost all of it up until now has, or at least all of Liber Secundus, has occurred within 1 week. It occurred since Christmas of 1913, and the date on this is December 30th, 1913. And so we're still talking about a time that's 7 months before the outbreak of World War I. It's a time when Dr. Jung was discovering the collective unconscious and delineating it. And so I want to read this. I want to read these 2 footnotes. The first one sets the date. This is chapter 4 of Liber Secundus DS 1, which means day 1. And it's the previous footnote says evening. Okay, so December 30th, 1913. In Black Book 3, Jung noted, all kinds of things lead me far away from my scientific endeavor, which I thought I had subscribed to firmly. I wanted to serve humanity through it. And now my soul, you lead me to these new things. Yes, it is in the between world. It is the in-between world, the pathless, the manifold dazzling. I forgot that I had reached a new world, which had been alien to me previously. I see neither way nor path.
You're just frozen, Skip.
Broken off. I suppose.
You froze at I see no way path right there.
Okay, just a second. All right, let me just begin again.
Good.
December 30th, 1913. All kinds of things lead me far away from my scientific endeavor, which I thought I had subscribed to firmly. I wanted to serve humanity through it. And now, my soul, you lead me to these new things. Yes, it is the in-between world, the pathless, the manifold dazzling. I forgot I had reached a new world, which had been alien to me previously. I see neither way nor path. What I believed about the soul has to become true here, namely that she knows her own way better, and that no intention can prescribe her a better one. I feel that a large chunk of science has been broken off. I suppose it must be like this for the sake of the soul and her life. I find the thought that this must occur only for me agonizing, and that perhaps no one will gain insight from my work. But my soul demands this achievement. I should be able to do this just for myself without hope, for the sake of God. This is truly a hard way. But what else did those Anchorites of the first centuries of Christianity do? And were they the worst or least capable of those living at the end? Hardly, since they came to the most relentless conclusions with regard to the psychological necessity of their time. They left wife and child, wealth, glory, and science, and turned toward the desert. For God's sake, so be it. And then another footnote. This is the one about, maybe not. In the next chapter, the Anchorite is identified as Ammonius. A letter of December 31, 1913, Jung noted that the Anchorite came from the 3rd century. That's from the Jung family archive. There are 3 historical figures named Ammonius in Alexandria from this period. Ammonius, a Christian philosopher in the 3rd century, once thought to have been responsible for the medieval divisions of the Gospels. Ammonius Cetus, who was born a Christian but turned to Greek philosophy, and whose work presents a transition from Platonism to Neoplatonism, and Neoplatonic Ammonius in the 5th century, who tried to reconcile Aristotle and the Bible. At Alexandria, there was accommodation between Neoplatonism and Christianity, and some of the pupils of the latter Ammonius converted to Christianity. Okay, so that's sort of the background. Anybody want to comment on this? I didn't actually have the John 1 through 14.
I just, go ahead.
Just wondering, the Black Book was written before the Red Book?
Yes, the Black Book was Dr. Jung's clinical notebook where he was taking notes about himself. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But he then, during the visioning period of the Red Book period, which was 5 years, Dr. Jung made notes in the Black Books. And then at some point, he decided to get himself this wonderful 400-page red bound, like a scrapbook. Think of it as a scrapbook. It was a very large one. As you know from the folio edition, it's quite large. And he transcribed these events. He interpreted and transcribed these events into the Red Book. So what was published in 2009 was the Red Book, was his sort of restatement of this visionary period. But he still, during this entire 15-year period, he was just sort of at sea. He didn't see any connection between what he was doing and the future of psychology. He was just bouncing around, with one exception. At some point in that period, he realized that there was a connection to alchemy at some level. He didn't say, aha, alchemy is going to teach me this. That isn't what he did at all. But what he did was he spent 10 years writing a lexicon of alchemical terms. For example, the most famous one is salve et coagula, which salve et coagula, which means dissolve and recoagulate. Okay, and so he went through old alchemical texts. He was collecting alchemical texts from the medieval time, and he was just working out what these phrases meant to the point where he could read them. Okay, but he spent 10 years creating this lexicon, and it's now available somewhere. It's published somewhere, but I don't have it. I haven't paid that much attention to that lexicon. But what I have paid attention to, I've read, with the exception of about 20 pages, the entire Black Books, which is 7 volumes. And what I can say is that there are profound changes between what was noted in the Black Books and what he actually inscribed into his Red Book. And he did paintings of the experiences, etc. And he worked on this pretty faithfully, sort of as an avocation while seeing patients. He was seeing 7 to 9 patients a day, but he was doing this in the evening. There wasn't any radio or TV, so he was amusing himself in this way. And that lasted until 1928. In 1928, he had a letter from Richard Wilhelm, who had been a missionary in China. Actually, I think he was in Hainan Island for a long time, but that's China. And Richard Wilhelm wanted him, he had translated The Secret of the Golden Flower, so-called, in a Chinese alchemical text. And he asked Jung to write a foreword and commentary from the Western perspective about The Secret of the Golden Flower. And it was in that process that Jung realized, aha, this is a common human experience, and it's common to Western people as well as to Chinese. And many of the experiences that are described in The Secret of the Golden Flower, which I have read and talked about at length on this YouTube channel, many of those things are very common, and we recognize them too. But until that time, 1928, Dr. Jung was sort of at sea in his own psyche and didn't understand how any of this connected. And so it was at the time that he started to look at The Secret of the Golden Flower and then the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which was translated by a man named Wentz, and he wrote the forward to the Book of the Dead, that these connections between East and West were started to be found. And so that made his interactions with the East, which were fairly limited. He went to India one time for about 3 months, I believe, 6 weeks of which he had very serious dysentery and was hospitalized. And he went home. And he had been given an honorary degree by some Indian university. And so, you know, I'm not aboard with everything he says about India. I've personally been to India 44 times. I spent about 2 years of my life there. I started 40 production centers there, one way or another, over about a 20-year period. And so I know some things about India as well. Plus I speak Chinese, thanks to our government. But what Jung was doing was seeing how the psyche works and seeing how closely things match between East and West, among all religions. Okay, that's what he was seeing. So what we're reading here in the Red Book is the very beginning of his experience, his Red Book experience, the very beginning. He hadn't been able to assess it at all, really. He was just letting it flow. He was letting it all hang out. And World War I had not yet started. So by 7 months later, he was actually in Aberdeen, Scotland, when war broke out, when the guns of August started to boom. And he said he was the happiest man alive on that day because he realized that the prefiguration dreams and visions that he had been having in the previous 9 months were actually coming from the collective unconscious. It was at that moment that he saw the collective unconscious, recognized that it wasn't him going crazy, but him experienced something at a very deep unconscious level that everybody in Europe was feeling at that time.
He was having dreams about visions of rivers of blood and so on. Is that?
I beg your pardon?
He was having dreams of rivers of blood flowing through Europe and things like that.
Right. That's what he was. Those were the experiences he was having in late 1913 and early 2014 or 1914, and there were 12 of them. Okay, including 5 dreams that were repetitive dreams, but they were all prefigurations of World War I. And what he hadn't realized before then was that we human beings communicate unconsciously in unconscious ways. And it was because of this 9-month period, which began, I think, October 12th, 1913, that he realized that there is an unconscious connection among all of us. And so, I'd like to mention our confluence for next October, which we're in the process of getting the website, get the kinks worked out of it. It's possible to register and secure rooms for that time. We're only going to allow 40 people besides the organizers and our coterie. So there are only going to be 40 people admitted. We already have one reservation as of yesterday because I announced the website yesterday. Unfortunately, the sign up doesn't yet include the fee for the confluence. It includes lodging, room board, and facilities access, but it doesn't include the fee for the confluence per se. And that fee is $495 plus $50 for a service charge to the Mount Madonna Retreat Center. But otherwise, you can see everything on the website. And that was on the email that I sent out yesterday, so everybody would know what that is.
So we can sign up with Mount Madonna for the facilities and then separately sign up, or is that going to come?
I'm assuming that because I have one friend from London who has already signed up, so we already have a foreign participant, and there are only going to be 40 spaces, so it is going to be limited. All right, so let's begin with the Anchorite.
Before we start, I think, no pun intended, but I think the Chinese connection, as it were, Jung made when he was asked to write the foreword is interesting because the Chinese characters are often, one word is composed of other characters, which are concepts. So in a sense, it has a connotation like Latin, where the word is more of a story. Just like in Hebrew, the characters are a word that are backed by a lot of things. And for example, you probably already know this, but in Chinese, the word crisis, which obviously invokes an intense experience, is actually composed of the two characters of danger and opportunity. So there's this eye of the storm of crisis that has both. And I think this is
precisely that character has a man lying at the bottom of a cliff who's fallen down, who's broken and fallen down. And so it is crisis and danger. You're correct on that.
And then the opportunity part, just like when you fell and broke your leg, well, that took a different path.
Right.
So it's
exactly.
And then I think the other with the footnotes, just ammonious, quite an alchemical word. I mean, ammonia is an alchemical corrosive that's used. It also is used. So you have the corrosive, which eats away, but squids use it. They regulate their ammonia to provide buoyancy, to raise and lower water. So not only eliminating, but also rising. So ammonia has kind of a combination of say Nietzsche's down going, as well as the luminous liberation upward as well. So between just with ammonia as a chemical, the corrosive eats away, but gets to the pure that can be more buoyant.
Okay, so this reading has one of my favorite quotes in it, but we'll get to that in due course. So again, this is Dr. Jung in An Active Imagination on December 30th, 1913. And here's what he says. On the following night, I found myself on new paths. Hot, dry air flowed around me, and I saw the desert, yellow sand all around, heaped up in waves, a terrible, irascible sun, a sky as blue as tarnished steel, the air shimmering above the earth. On my right side, a deeply cut valley with a dry riverbed. some languid grass and dusty brambles. In the sand, I see the tracks of naked feet that lead up from the rocky valley to the plateau. I follow them along a high dune. Where it falls off, the tracks move off to the other side. They appear to be fresh, and old, half-worn away footprints run alongside. I pursue them attentively. Again, they follow the slopes of the dune. Now they flow into another set of footprints, but it is the same set that I have already followed, the one ascending from the valley. Henceforth, I follow the footprints downward in astonishment. I soon reach the hot red rocks corroded by the wind. On the stone, the footprints are lost, but I see where the rock falls off in layers, and I climb down. The air glows and the rock burns my soles. Now I have reached the bottom. There are the tracks again. They lead along the winding of the valleys, a short distance. Suddenly I stand before a small hut covered in reeds and made of mud bricks. A rickety wooden plank forms the door where a cross has been painted in red. I open it quietly. A haggard man covered in white linen mantle is sitting on a mat with his back leaning against the wall. Across his knees lies a book in yellow parchment with beautiful black handwriting, a Greek gospel without doubt. I am with an Anchorite of the Libyan desert. I am disturbing you, Father. Anchorite, who I'll refer to as A in this dialogue now. A, you do not disturb me, but do not call me Father. I am a man like you. What is your desire? I come without desire. I have come to this place in the desert by chance and found tracks in the sand up there that led me in a circle to you. A, you found the tracks of my daily walks at daybreak and sunset. Excuse me if I interpret your devotion. It is a rare opportunity for me to be with you. I have never before seen an Anchorite. A, there are several others whom you can see further down in this valley. Some have huts like me. Others live in the graves that the ancients have hollowed out of these rocks. I live uppermost in the valley because it is most solitary and quiet here, and because here I am closest to the peace of the desert. Have you already been here long? A, I have lived here for perhaps 10 years, but really I can no longer remember exactly how long it is. It could also be a few more years. Time passes so quickly. Time passes quickly? How is that possible? Your life must be frightfully monotonous. A, time certainly passes quickly for me, much too quickly even. It seems you are a pagan. Me? No, not exactly. I was raised in the Christian faith. A, well then, how can you ask whether time drags on for me? You must know that what preoccupies a man who is grieving, only idlers grow bored. Again, forgive me, my curiosity is great. What then do you occupy yourself with? A, are you a child? To begin with, you see that I am reading and that I keep regular hours. But I can see nothing at all with which you could occupy yourself here. You must have read this book from cover to cover often enough. And if it is the Gospels, as I suppose, then I am sure you already know them by heart. A, how childishly you speak. Surely you know that one can read a book many times. Perhaps you almost know it by heart, and nevertheless it can be that when you look again into the lines before you, Certain things appear new, or even new thoughts occur to you that you did not have before. Every word can work productively in your spirit. And finally, if you have once left the book for a week and you take it up again after your spirit has experienced various different changes, then a number of things will dawn on you. I have difficulty grasping this. The book remains one and the same, certainly a wonderfully profound, yes, even divine matter, but surely not rich enough to fill countless years. You are astonishing. How then do you read this holy book? Do you really always see only one and the same meaning in it? Where do you come from? Are you truly a pagan? I beg you, please don't hold it against me if I read like a pagan. Let me talk with you. I am here to learn from you. Consider me as an ignorant student, which I am in these matters. If I call you a pagan, don't take it as an insult. I used to be a pagan too, exactly like you, as I well remember. Therefore, how can I blame you for your ignorance? I thank you for your patience, but it matters very much to me to know how you read and what you take from this book. Your question is not easy to answer. It's easier to explain colors to a blind person. You must know one thing above all. A succession of words does not have only one meaning, but men strive to assign only a single meaning to the sequence of words in order to have an unambiguous language. This striving is worldly and constricted and belongs to the deepest layers of the divine creative plan. On the higher levels of insight into divine thoughts, you recognize that the sequence of words has more than one valid meaning. Only to the all-knowing is it given to know all the meanings of the sequence of words. Increasingly, we try to grasp a few more meanings. Okay, I'm going to stop there for the moment. I just want to read this footnote. Philo Judaeus, also called Philo of Alexandria, 20 BCE to 20 CE, or 50 CE, was a Greek-speaking Jewish philosopher. His works presented a fusion of Greek philosophy and Judaism. For Philo, God, to whom he referred by the Platonic term tuon, or the one, was transcendent and unknowable. Certain powers reach down from God to the world. The facet of God knowable through reason is the divine logos. There has been much debate on the precise relation between Philo's concepts of the logos and John's gospel. On June 23rd, 1954, Jung wrote to James Kirch, quote, "The gnosis from which John the Evangelist emanated is definitely Jewish, but its essence is Hellenistic in the style of Philo Judaeus, the founder of the teaching of the Logos." Okay, all right, I'll shut up and let Jordan hold forth.
Or either of you. I think the biggest thing for me here is first he's talking about the pathless, but then he notices the paths, the footprints that have obviously been laid down in cycles, some eroded, some new. And for example, in Bob Place's Alchemical Tarot, the hermit is an image of the hermit with a lantern looking down at these old stone footprints. But the story goes, when the hermit stepped off the concrete slab, in essence, rationality, and walked into experience, he stepped into the sticky mud, and he stood and experienced the mud come up between his toes, and then he walked on. Well, the steps that he's looking at now in the card look all too familiar, but he decides to step into them, and they fit exactly. And what they were casts made of mud to stone by the earth of his first footprints. So in a sense, at first, while you were reading this, there's a almost a notion that these are Jung's older cycles of footprints. And then he finds this other character within him who's been making the footprints. But then if I jump from that parallel footprints storyline to the parallel of multiple readings of the same book, going over the same words, there's that same paint dries, but language never concept, where the books then reread over and over by the Anchorite give a different meaning. So his footprints are distinct. They're 6 inches over here, 6 inches over there, but they're along the same general way, but each step is a different experience in each cycle. So I think that parallel footprints lead to the parallel readings. And in that sense, the Anchorite has an experiential reading, whereas Jung is still in the childish, rational reading.
Okay. Anybody else in the panel want to speak about this? Yes, sir.
No.
Okay. This gets deeper, so I'll read on. I'm going to go back and read Ammonius's, or the Anchorite's, response once again, because I consider this one of the most important paragraphs in all of literature. The point being that once you put words on a page, it's like laying railroad tracks. You channelize your thinking into a certain way. And so whether you're writing a novel or a book report or what have you, as soon as there are words on a page, it's no longer eros and the irrational, it's the rational, the logos. And
I would clarify though, that like railroad tracks, sure, in terms of the arithmetic of the sequence of the words, but it remains ambiguous. Every time you go down the track of the words, you're not on railroad tracks. To me, your life experience yesterday contributes to what you're reading today, etc. So there is an ambiguity that keeps the words alive.
Yep. Right. Okay, that's fair enough. And Professor Murdoch asked what we're reading. We're reading the Reader's Edition of the Red Book by C.G. Jung. So we're on page 244, and this quote, mark it well. I didn't mark it well early in my research into Jung, and it took me maybe even years to find it again. But to me, it's really a profound paragraph. And so I'll actually start with Jung. Thank you for your patience, but it matters very much to me to know how you read and what you take from this book. A, your question is not easy to answer. It's easier to explain colors to a blind person. You must know one thing above all. A succession of words does not have only one meaning, but men strive to assign only a single meaning to the sequence of words in order to have an unambiguous language. This striving is worldly and constricted and belongs to the deepest layers of the divine creative plan. On the higher levels of insight into divine thoughts, you recognize that the sequence of words has more than one valid meaning. Only to the all-knowing is it given to know all the meanings of the sequence of words. Increasingly, we try to grasp a few more meanings. If I understand you correctly, you think that the holy writings of the New Testament also have a doubleness, an exoteric and an esoteric meaning, as a few Jewish scholars contend concerning their holy books. I'm intentionally not reading the following sentence because for my own reasons. Anchorite, I observe that you are wholly inexperienced in divine matters. I confess my deep ignorance about these things, but I am eager to experience and understand what you think about the multifaceted meaning of the sequence of words. A. Unfortunately, I am in no position to tell you everything I know about it, everything I know about it, but at least I will try to make the elements clear to you. Because of your ignorance, I will therefore begin elsewhere this time. What you need to know is that before I became acquainted with Christianity, I was a rhetorician and philosopher in the city of Alexandria. I had a great throng of students, including many Romans, a few barbarians, and also some Gauls and Britons. I taught them not only the history of Greek philosophy, but also the new systems, among them the system of Philo, whom we call the Jew. He was a clever head, but fantastically abstract, as the Jews are want to be when they devise systems. Moreover, he was a slave of his own words. I added my own and wove an atrocious web of words in which I ensnared not only my listeners, but also myself. We rioted terribly among words and names, our own miserable creatures, and accorded divine potency to them. Yes, we even believed in their reality and believed that we possessed the divine and had committed it to words. But Philo Judaeus, if this is who you mean, was a serious philosopher and a great thinker. Even John the Evangelist included some of Philo's thoughts in the gospel. You're right. It is to Philo's credit that he furnished language like so many other philosophers. He belongs to the language artists, but words should not become gods. And the footnote reads, in 1957, Jung wrote, until now, it was not truly and fundamentally been noted that our time, despite the prevalence of irreligiosity, is, so to speak, congenitally charged with the attainment of the Christian epoch, namely with the supremacy of the word, that logos which the central figure of Christian faith represents. The word has literally become our God and has remained so. And that's from Collected Work 10, paragraph 554.
I think it's interesting there that in that sense, he's implying that the word is also now a false idol worshipped.
Right.
So the singular meaning.
Yeah. I fail to understand you here. Does it not say in the gospel, according to John, God was the word? It appears to make quite explicit the point which you have just now rejected. Guard against being a slave to words. Here is the gospel read from the passage where it says, in him was the life. What does John say there? Footnote 48, John 1, 1 through 10. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. There was a man sent from God, whose name was John. The same came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all men through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of the light. That was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. Okay, so I will read on. That was the biblical passage. And life was the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not understood it, but it became a person sent from God by the name of John, who came as a witness to be a witness of the light. The genuine light, which illuminates each person, came into the world. He was in the world, and the world became through him, and the world did not recognize him. That is what I read here. But what do you make of this? Ammonius, I ask you, was this logos a concept, a word? It was a light, indeed a man, and lived among men. You see, Philo only lent John the word so that John would have at his disposal the word logos alongside the word light to describe the Son of Man. John gave to living men the meaning of the logos, but Philo gave logos as a dead concept that usurped life, even the divine life. Through this, the dead does not gain life, and the living is killed. And this was also my atrocious error. Okay, I'll stop.
Yeah, I like, because you have the concept of the logos is dead, but what's here is the logos has both the remembrance of life, where then in a sense matter would be spent light. And that's something I've been chewing on for about 20 years of matter is spent light. So the things that are things, logos, aren't necessarily dead, but they're at a different frequency, but they could be inert and not evolving. So in a sense, a stasis of life in that passage of death, which in one way equates to an afterlife, but I'm, of course, afterlife of archaeology and rocks and that kind of thing. But at the same time here, it's the both and of through this, the dead does not gain life and the living is killed. But right before that, gave to living men the meaning, but Philo gave the dead concept that usurped life. So it's interesting there that there's a more complex texture to, I won't say to the meaning of, but to the implications of logos. That is it a high-powered masculine noun similar to Sophia or Hokmah in a feminine form, or the lesser of the Spiritus Sanctus, even higher power? So I think what's interesting is the logos is kind of an on-ramp to the concept of both and. And when we call it dead, we're not wrong, but also it's an incomplete statement in a way, so that it's a proper simplification to make a distinction, I think, but it actually makes it more ambiguous to not tell the whole story, I think.
And so the Anchorite here is making a distinction between the word and the light. Okay. And, if you've ever studied anything, at first it's a bunch of words on a page and it's hard to appreciate what the meaning is. But when you get into it more deeply, whatever you're studying, it doesn't matter. Eventually you grok it. If you're studying something, if you're studying exobiology or something like that, whatever it is, it can be pretty dry and boring. I mean, reading the Bible can be pretty dry and boring until whatever it is touches you deeply. And then, aha, you get it. It's not because the words were on the page. It's because your physical living self connected with that sequence of words, whatever it is. Okay. So I'm not saying any sequence of words is true or not true. All I'm saying is that the distinction that's being made here is between a sequence of words and something that's alive. And whatever you're studying, until it's alive in you, it just puts you to sleep. As simple as that.
Yeah, that reminds me of a conversation with another architect where he was lamenting how much the new building code at 1 3-year iteration was just bullying his design, where I don't feel like I can do anything. I have to do this and that and that. And it's just all these mathematical words that are telling me I can't do what I want to do. And I said, actually, if you simplify it and look at the building code as a pair of shoes, now look at my shoes and look at your shoes. And the only building code is that they have to fit the feet that are wearing them. Now, my shoes are different than your shoes, but they both meet the letter of the code or the intent of the code, but not to a letter. And, your shoes are this color and my shoes are this color. Yours are denim and mine are leather or what have you. But it was interesting because he immediately was unfrustrated and went, oh, I just have to figure out how to insert this math in my creative process. And that it basically put him back in the saddle, but there were some restrictive pieces that were pretty big. You can't do this or that, but it was interesting is just framing it as a pair of shoes. Then, well, there's a whole shoe industry around the size of the foot, and the size of the foot's the only thing that matters.
Right. Okay, so I'm asked again, what page are we on? So we're in the Red Book, Reader's Edition, page 246. For those who are looking at it, the larger version of the Red Book, it's in the chapter entitled The Anchorite, and we're about 5 or 6 pages on at this point. I'm going to read that paragraph again. This is the Anchorite responding now that we've had this discussion, and then I'll keep going. A, I ask you, was this logos a concept, a word? It was a light, indeed a man, and lived among men. You see, Philo only lent John the word so that John would have at his disposal the word logos alongside the word light to describe the Son of Man. John gave to living men the meaning of the logos, but Philo gave logos as a dead concept that usurped life, even the divine life. Through this, the dead does not gain life, and the living is killed. And this was also my atrocious error. I see what you mean. This thought is new to me and seems worth consideration. Until now, it had always seemed to me as if it were exactly that which was meaningful in John, namely that the Son of Man is the Logos, in that he thus elevates the lower to the higher spirit, to the world of the Logos. But you lead me to see the matter conversely, namely that John brings the meaning of the Logos down to man. A, I learned to see that John has, in fact, even done the great service of having brought the meaning of the Logos up to man. You have peculiar insights that stretch my curiosity to the utmost. How is that? Do you think that the human stands higher than the Logos? A, I want to answer this question within the scope of your understanding. If the human God had not become important above everything, he should not have appeared as the Son in the flesh, but in the Logos. That makes sense to me, but I confess that this view is surprising to me. It is especially astonishing to me that you, a Christian anchorite, have come to such views. I would not have expected this of you. And there's a footnote from John 1:14. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. A, As I have already noticed, you have a completely false idea of me and my essence. Let me give you a small example of my preoccupation. I've spent many years alone with the process of unlearning. Have you ever unlearned anything? Well, then you should know how long it takes. And I was a successful teacher. As you know, for such people to unlearn is difficult or even impossible. But I see that the sun has gone down. Soon it will be completely dark. Night is the time of silence. I want to show you your place for the night. I need the morning for my work, but after midday you can come to me again if you like. Then I will continue. Then we will continue our conversation. He leads me out of the hut. The valley is covered in blue shadows. The first stars are already glittering in the sky. He leads me around the corner of a rock. We are standing at the entrance of a grave cut into the stone. We step in. Not far from the entrance lies a heap of reeds covered with mats. Next to it there is a pitcher of water, and on a white cloth there are dried dates and black bread. Here is your place and your supper. Sleep well, and do not forget your morning prayer when the sun rises. Okay, so that completes the first interaction with the Anchorite.
I really like the footnote there, footnote 50, because those are traditional Egyptian gifts to the dead. So
Right.
The whole idea of as you go to sleep, you're dying, in the morning you are resurrected. So
Right.
it is tracking that along with that whole life cycle of
Right.
the life, death. And then
Right. So the footnote reads, the draft has Egyptian. In an Egyptian context, the water, dates, and bread would be offering to the dead. Now, for my lights, this is why Edward Edinger felt that Jung's consciousness and psyche was so enormous compared to all the rest of us, because this is a conversation that he is having within himself. Okay. Now he was raised the son of a pastor. He never grokked Christianity when he was growing up. He had a vision when he was 11 years old of God defecating on the Cathedral of Basel, and didn't know what that meant at the time, but he felt enormous relief as an 11-year-old when he had this vision. And so to me, part of the essence and significance of that vision is that he recognized that the logos, which is in the form of dogma and all kinds of things in every religion, is all well and good, but it isn't the essence. Okay, it's not the life. Okay, and so for me, that's the point. And I mean, I can't say how much this has touched me over the last, I don't know, 15 or 20 years. It touched me very deeply. But everything that Jung did, but since 2009, since the Red Book was published, it helped me perceive what the issue is and why we get ourselves so wrapped around the crank about, my religion is right and yours is wrong. That's baloney. Okay, that's just total baloney. And yet we've killed millions of human beings because of that attitude. And no religion has the answer, has the life. And so the point of John 1 through 14 is that it says it all there. It's already there. Okay? It is there in the Bible. And, as I think back on, most people who follow this channel know that 25 years ago, my daughter came back from a fellowship of the U.S. Information Service in Kazan, Tatarstan, believe it or not. And she lived with a Muslim family there, or a Muslim woman and her daughter, for a year and a half. And when she came back, after we had had a lovely dinner together and talked about our history together, she said, "I'm sorry to say this to you, Dad, but I think you're going to hell." Well, who teaches a child to say such a thing to a parent? Okay, and that didn't come from the Muslim woman. It came from Christian missionaries who she ran into in Kazan. They were American Christian missionaries. And during her sojourn in Russia, she had her own numinous moment, I would say. Okay. And for her, Christianity was the essence of that. And that event that evening on her birthday, on her 22nd birthday, drove a wedge between us for at least a decade. It took me a decade to get my mind around what was going on between me and my daughter. And it wasn't my daughter stepping back from her numinous experience. It was for me catching up to understand what was going on and to appreciate John 1 through 14. And as some of you know, I've given my daughter a number of gifts that demonstrate my respect now for her religion. And I've prepared for her in calligraphy an image of John 1 through 14, which I think she has on her wall now. And so to me, that passage contains the essence of everything we're saying here. And I don't know, it touches me at a very deep emotional level, but I don't, I don't expect others to follow my view. Go ahead, other comments?
Well, I think in respect to your experience there, and it wasn't your daughter, and it wasn't the Muslim family, it was actually the Christians that, anything that has to do with the self is bad for marketing. And, they don't want you to see that you are in the image of, and you also are the light together, which then if I'm created in the image of some divine source, well, then that means I have inner divinity. And even that concept flies in their face to then get, a 22-year-old woman to speak to her dad, you, in such a way that she's being led by the nose without realizing it, because they're trying to keep, oh, you'll go to hell. Well, the thing is, their concept is, I'm like, oh, cool, I get to go to timeout, or I'm grounded, which means I don't have to deal with you anymore, the editorial you of the ecclesiastical structure. And I think what's interesting is it's a childlike, you're in trouble or you're not in trouble, which is, in a sense, creates a trauma trigger to anyone still under the power of suggestion, instead of the unthreatened adult who has been the child who grew into the adult. It makes a lie of almost any statement, because they always try to they always try to lead you away from the Anchorite, who that Jung is coming to as that child. But the most ecclesiastical structures, one of the true evils to me is any fundamentalist or fanatical ecclesiastical institution. Any kind of thinking, because it's always, I don't know if it's Baudelaire or Voltaire or someone else, but said, never are people so accurately and happily cruel and murderous as when they're under the influence of the church, any church. I have a reason to do this. I'm right to do, and it's so wrong.
Okay, other comments?
Skip? Yeah, I feel that what is wonderful here, and also somewhat different from how I understand John 1 through 14, is that unlearning, that not attaching to whatever we perceive at the moment is the meaning of those words. And that Jung's dialogue here with the Anchorite is, don't get attached to the words. And exactly more what you were saying. Yes, they're real, though their ties laid down, but each time you come to them, it's your experience that you're trusting. It's why that image and because the Tibetan paintings of the Buddha is touching, his left hand is touching the earth. And this was a symbol from when all the Maras came and all the temptations of Christ, and said, how do we know? How do you know? You know something. You have a knowing. You have an awareness. You have an awakening. And he put his hand down to the earth and said, the earth is my witness, which is my experience is what I trust. The experience, like you're saying, in your bones, that numinous quality of knowing, and not to be so attached to the words. And I feel like Jung's helping bring us into that area where, words were so profound when the printing press came and people could see and read. That was this huge, got really attached to it.
Sure. Because
really
it really opened up the psyche of so many people beyond the monks, and you see why the monks got so committed to what they were doing, because people who couldn't read or didn't have access to anything to read weren't having these wonderful experiences in their psyche, and it was only when the printing press came along that people even had the opportunity for that. And of course, the first book that was published basically was the Bible, and it's still the most published book in the world. And but
I feel like what we lost, Skip, somewhat was the shamanic knowing, the more experiential knowing that was being held in the culture, right?
Right.
But that got buried, and maybe even told as you're going to go to hell. Look at all the witches and people that were
exactly. Yeah, and that whole 1,000 years, or 2,000 years from the time of Abraham to the time of Gutenberg was just tied up in that. And now we have the ability to see. Okay. I don't mean see with my eyes. I mean see and understand. And, there are parables in the Bible of, the blind man who testifies on behalf of Christ when Christ is tried, who says, before I was blind, but now I see. Okay. He didn't mean his eyes were regenerated by Jesus Christ. Not at all. He saw the inner light. And there was this man, Jesus, who made that possible for him. The same, the same is true of many things around that part of the Bible. For example, the resurrection of Lazarus. Well, that physical body didn't come back to life and walk around and start doing things with his city, with his sister Mary. What Jung did for her is that he pointed out to her that Lazarus was still alive in her heart and hadn't changed. And for anybody who has lost a parent or a sibling, which I've lost both, nothing changes at the death of that person. Nothing. Absolutely nothing changes, except that this piece of me isn't having more experiences. But in terms of your love for these people and their love for you, that doesn't change. And you simply have to open your eyes to it, to that fact. And then, yes, you can grieve. We have to grieve. But then we have to move on with what is our life, our physical life, until it's no longer our time to be alive.
So I think in regards to Judith's comment too, that deep knowing, the shamanic knowing, that is, like, as Jung would say, I have no need of belief. I have a knowing, or a deep knowing.
Yeah.
It's interesting because tying it into the printing press, the Gutenberg press too, if you're around any group of graphic artists these days, if you mention a font, you just started a little civil war.
Sure.
Then they're not even going to get to the meaning. It's this HOA design review committee of, oh, Helvetica is so famous. I'm like, yeah, it's the most famous, boring font ever. And, that's even me having an opinion. And that would spark just outright war about what font's going to go in any book. So they distance themselves even from that shamanic down to this fine grain of being lost and right or wrong, good or bad, instead of feeling gut. What font does this story want, kind of thing, and that's a thinking piece. That's valid. But then there's legibility, et cetera, and they get into a whole superficial world just about what font is chosen, which to me is absolutely the other end of the shamanic, which I think that's a wonderful point, Judith, because that's where a lot of modern society, it gets in conflict. No, my way is the right way, when there is really no way except everyone's way.
Okay, so let's begin the second half of this. I do want to try to get through the Anchorite today.
Amen.
I beg your pardon?
I wanted to say something here about.
Go ahead, Neil. Go ahead.
One of the things that has kept me connected with Jung is just knowing his experience with his father's experience with religion and knowing about that and how it did not make him happy in the least, and so Jung had to find another way, and also given that experience that you mentioned about the dream of defecating on the Basel Cathedral, a couple of decades ago, I was in my very first art therapy class, and hadn't painted anything in my life, and what I painted was a church, and I decided to paint a church. I grew up with the Mennonites and in the Fraser Valley of British Columbia, and quite an unhappy home. And but here I am in art therapy class, and I painted a church, and it was so beautiful. And as I went to put the brush back into the bottle or the jar, it went across the painting, and a piece of paint fell onto my church, and it fell right on the door of the church, and it made an outline of a half moon. And what kind of a building do you have when you have a moon on the door?
Outhouse.
It's an outhouse.
Very good.
So
Okay.
Anyway, that was.
All right,
That's
so let me read on here now. There's still about 5 pages to go, so I'm going to blast through it to a certain degree. Okay, so we're now to part 2. So we finished where Jung was put to bed by the Anchorite on the first night. And then and part 2 begins like this. The solitary lives in endless desert full of awesome beauty. He looks at the whole and at inner meaning. He loathes manifold diversity if it is near him. He looks at it from afar in its totality. Consequently, silvery splendor and joy and beauty cloaked as diversity for him. What is near him must be simple and innocent, since close at hand the manifold and complicated tear and break through the silvery splendor. No cloudiness of the sky, no haze or mist is allowed to be around him. Otherwise, he cannot look at the distant manifold in the whole. Consequently, the solitary loves the desert above all, where everything nearby is simple and nothing turbid or blurred lies between him and the far away. In the following almost 2 pages are in italics. And there's a footnote at the beginning of it, so I want to read this footnote first. It says, walking around in a circle, I happen to return to myself and to him, the solitary one who lives down in the depths, hidden from the light, held securely by the warm bosom of the rock. Above him, the glowing desert and sharp resplendent skies. Now, here's what is in italics. The life of the solitary would be cold were it not for the immense sun, which makes the air and rocks glow. The sun and its eternal splendor replace for the solitary his own life warmth. His heart longs for the sun. He wanders to the lands of the sun. He dreams of the flickering splendor of the sun, of the hot red stones spread out at midday, of the golden hot rays of dry sand. The solitary seeks the sun, and no one else is so ready to open his heart as he is. Therefore, he loves the desert above all, since he loves its deep stillness. He needs little food, since the sun and its glow nourish him. Consequently, the solitary loves the desert above all, since it is the mother. It is a mother to him, giving him food and invigorating warmth at regular hours. In the desert, the solitary is relieved of care and therefore turns his whole life to the sprouting garden of his soul, which can flourish only under a hot sun. In his garden, the delicious red fruit grows that bears swelling sweetness under a tight skin. You think that the solitary is poor. You do not see that he strolls under laden fruit trees and that his hand touches grain 100-fold. Under dark leaves, the overfull reddish blossoms swell toward him from abundant buds, and the fruit almost bursts with thronging juices. Fragrant resins drip from his trees, and under his feet, thrusting seed breaks open. If the sun sinks onto the plain of the sea like an exhausted bird, the solitary envelops himself and holds his breath. He does not move, and it is pure expectancy until the miracle of the renewal of light rises in the east. Brimful, delicious expectation is in the solitary. The horror of the desert and of withered evaporation surround him, and you do not understand how the solitary can live. But his eye rests on the garden, and his ears listen to the source, and his hand touches velvet leaves and fruit, and his breath draws in sweet perfumes from blossom-rich trees. He cannot tell you, since the splendor of his garden is so abundant. He stammers when he speaks of it, and he appears to you to be poor in spirit and in life. But his hand does not know where it should reach in all this indescribable fullness. And there's a footnote that instead of fullness, wholeness. He gives you a small, insignificant fruit, which has just fallen at his feet. It appears worthless to you, but if you consider it, you will see that this fruit tastes like a sun, which you could not have dreamt of. It gives off a perfume that confuses your senses and makes you dream of rose gardens and sweet wine and whispering palm trees. And you hold this one fruit in your hands, dreaming. And you would like the tree in which it grows, the garden in which this tree stands, and the sun which brought forth this garden. And you yourself want to be that solitary who strolls with the sun in his garden, his gaze resting on pendant flowers and his hand brushing 100-fold of rain, and his breath drinking the perfume from 1,000 roses. Dull from the sun and drunk from fermenting wines, you lie down in ancient graves, whose walls resound with many voices and many colors of 1,000 solar years. When you grow, then you see everything living again as it was. And when you sleep, you rest like everything that was, and your dreams echo softly again from the distant temple chants. You sleep down through the 1,000 solar years, and you wake up through the 1,000 solar years, and your dreams full of ancient lore adorn the walls of your bedchamber. You also see yourself in totality. You sit and lean against the wall and look at the beautiful, riddlesome totality. The Summa lies before you like a book, and an unspeakable greed seizes you to devour it. Consequently, you lean back and stiffen and sit for a long time. You are completely incapable of grasping it. Here and there a light flickers. Here and there a fruit falls from high trees, which you can grasp. Here and there your foot strikes gold. But what is it if you compare it with the totality which lies spread out tangibly close to you? You stretch out your hand, but it remains hanging in visible webs. It remains hanging in invisible webs. You want to see it exactly as it is, but something cloudy and opaque pushes itself exactly in between. You would like to tear a piece out of it. It is smooth and impenetrable, like polished steel. So you sink back and get against the wall. And when you have crawled through all the glowing hot crucibles of the hell of doubt, you sit once more and lean back and look at the wonder of the Summa, the whole, that lies spread out before you. Here and there a light flickers. Here and there a fruit falls. For you, it is all too little, but you begin to be satisfied with yourself, and you pay no attention to the years passing away. What are years? What is hurrying time to him that sits under a tree? Your time passes like a breath of air, and you wait for the next light and the next fruit. The writing lies before you and always says the same if you believe in words. But if you believe in things in whose places only words stand, you never come to the end. And yet you must go an endless road, since life flows not only down an infinite path, but also an infinite one. But the unbounded makes you anxious, since the unbounded is fearful and your humanity rebels against it. Consequently, you seek limits and restraints so that you do not lose yourself tumbling into infinity. Restraint becomes imperative for you. You cry out for the word, which has one meaning and no other, so that you escape boundless ambiguity. The word becomes your God, since it protects you from the countless possibilities of interpretation. The word is protective magic against the demons of the unending, which tear at your soul and want to scatter you to the winds. You are saved if you can say at last, that is that, only that. You speak the magic word and the limitless is finally banished. Because of that, men seek and make words. He who breaks the wall of words overthrows gods and defiles temples. The solitary is a murderer. He murders the people because he thus thinks and thereby breaks down ancient sacred walls. He calls up the demons of the boundless, and he sits, leans back, and does not hear the groans of mankind, whom the fearful fiery smoke has seized. And yet you cannot find the new words if you do not shatter the old words. But no one should shatter the old words unless he finds the new word that is a firm rampart against the limitless and grasps more life in it than the old word. A new word is a new God for old men. Man remains the same even if you create a new model of God for him. He remains an imitator. What was word shall become man. The word created the world and came before the world. It lit up like a light in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. And thus the word should become what the darkness can comprehend. Since what use is the light if the darkness does not comprehend it? But your darkness should grasp the light. Just a second, I just want to decide whether to. Okay, I'm going to finish this because it's just another half page. The God of words is cold and dead and shines from afar like the moon, mysteriously and inaccessibly. Let the word return to its creator, to man, and thus the word will be heightened in man. Man should be light, limits, measure. May he be your fruit for which you longingly reach. The darkness does not comprehend the word, but rather man. Indeed, it seizes him, since he himself is a piece of the darkness. Not from the word down to man, but from the word up to man. That is what the darkness comprehends. The darkness is your mother. She behooves reverence, since the mother is dangerous. She has power over you, since she gave birth to you. Honor the darkness as the light, and you will illuminate your darkness. If you comprehend the darkness, it seizes you. It comes over you like the night with black shadows and countless shimmering stars. Silence and peace come over you if you begin to comprehend the darkness. Only he who does not comprehend the darkness fears the night. Through comprehending the dark, the nocturnal, the abyssal, in you, you become utterly simple, and you prepare to sleep through the millennia like everyone else. And you sleep down into the womb of the millennia, and your walls resound with ancient temple chants. Since the simple is what always was, peace and blue night spread over you while you dream in the grave of the millennia. Okay.
Reminds me of I don't know if it's Rumi, I too much love the stars to be afraid of the night.
Yeah. I mean, that passage is almost overwhelming to me. I've read it so many times, and it's so deep that, if you don't have a copy of the Red Book, it's time to get one. If only to read that second part of this essay entitled The Anchorite. To me, it's just a beautiful, beautiful section of the Red Book. Other comments?
I agree, Skip. I feel like it's saying things in again, his words coming through him, but they feel so universal to me. They feel so also beyond words, take on words, which having a practice of that unlearning or unattaching to, I've got the meaning. Letting go of left brain as the guiding only light, like you did with the building guy, like, can you open it up? And it's very potent. I'm very appreciative to share it here in the group, because I think it adds more life as we're all co-regulating with each other as we read this, and having that sense of almost like our psyche a lot opening.
Yeah.
That's how it feels. So thank you.
Yeah. Now, I think it's at this point, it's important to go back to the very beginning of the Red Book, because what Dr. Jung talks about at the very beginning is how he had to leave his science and all his words and knowledge aside so that he could do this for us. And when you look at the enormity of what the Red Book represents, it's just breathtaking. And so it would have been impossible for anyone who was with us back when we began this project to appreciate what he was saying at that time. And I just want to read both the prelude and the first two paragraphs of The Way of What Is to Come, the very beginning of the Red Book. And so he cites a couple of biblical passages, and he says, Isaiah said, "Who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form, no comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did not esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted." And so Isaiah is, 500 years before Christ. And so this, in effect, is a prophecy that he was making. So the next part says, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace." Again, that was from Isaiah. And then John said, "And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, and the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth." And then Isaiah again, "The wilderness of the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice, the blossom as the rose. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice even with joy and singing. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as a hart, and the tongue of the dumb sing. For in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert. And the parched ground shall become a pool, and the thirsty land springs of water. In the habitation of dragons, where each lay, shall be grass with reeds and rushes. And an highway shall be there, and a way, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it, but it shall be for those, the wayfaring men, though fools shall not err therein." Again from Isaiah. And then what Jung put at the beginning of the Red Book. And there's a note written by C.G. Jung with his own hand at his house in Kusnacht, Zurich, in the year 1915. "If I speak of the spirit of this time, I must say no one and nothing can justify what I must proclaim to you. Justification is superfluous to me, since I have no choice, but I must. I have learned that in addition to the spirit of this time, there is still another spirit at work, namely that which rules the depths of everything contemporary. The spirit of this time would like to hear of use and value. I also thought this way, and my humanity still thinks this way, but the other spirit forces me nevertheless to speak beyond justification, use, and meaning. Filled with human pride and blinded by this presumptuous spirit of the times, I long sought to hold the other spirit away from me, but I did not consider that the spirit of the depths from time immemorial and for all the future possesses a greater power than the spirit of this time, who changes with the generations. The spirit of the depths has subjugated all pride and arrogance to the power of judgment. He took away my belief in science. He robbed me of the joy of explaining and ordering things, and he let devotion to the ideals of this time die out in me. He forced me down to the last and simplest things. The spirit of the depths took my understanding and all my knowledge and placed them at the service of the inexplicable and the paradoxical. He robbed me of speech and writing for everything that was not in his service, namely the melting together of sense and nonsense, which produce the supreme meaning. And I'll just carry on because he has the supreme meaning here, and it's in italics. But the supreme meaning is the path, the way, and the bridge to what is to come. That is the God yet to come. It is not the coming God himself, but his image, which appears in the supreme meaning. God is an image, and those who worship him must worship him in the image of the supreme meaning. The supreme meaning is not a meaning and not an absurdity. It is an image and a force in one, magnificence and force together. The supreme meaning is the beginning and the end, It is the bridge of going across and fulfillment. The other gods died out of their temporality, yet the supreme meaning never dies. It turns into meaning and then into absurdity. And out of the fire and blood of their collision, the supreme meaning rises up, rejuvenated anew. The image of God has a shadow. The supreme meaning is real and casts a shadow. For what can be actual and corporeal and have no shadow? The shadow is nonsense. It lacks force and has no continued existence through itself, but nonsense is the inseparable and undying brother of the supreme meaning. Like plants, so men also grow, some in the light, others in the shadows. There are many who need the shadows and not the light. The image of God throws a shadow that is just as great as itself. The supreme meaning is great and small. It is as wide as the space of the starry heaven and as narrow as the cell of the living body. I'll stop there.
Could you give the page number for that again?
Well, that was the very beginning of the Red Book, at the very, very beginning of it, that I was reading. It's called The Way of What Is to Come. And this is the very first chapter of Liber Primus, of the first book. And I personally think that what is in this particular chapter is so profound that one can contemplate on it for a lifetime and not find the end of it. And I certainly have done. And I'm certainly glad that long ago, 15 years ago, I reconciled my own psyche with that of my daughter. And I've tried to say that to her without saying it to her, because I've never spoken to her about that evening in 1998. But one of my motivations for doing this YouTube channel was to leave something for my grandchildren that, I look at my own grandparents and I know almost nothing about them. I know some very big bullet points about them. And they were living through these incredible perilous times that Dr. Jung was living through. One of my grandfathers was born the same year as C.G. Jung, and he lived to be 97. My grandfather did. He'd lost his mind about 10 years before that, but he lived on for another 10 years. He didn't recognize me after he was 88 years old. Didn't know who I was.
How old were you then, Skip?
What, when he died?
Well, when he stopped recognizing you.
Oh, I was a senior in college. That was the last time I physically saw him. Because shortly after that, my aunt put him in a home for people that were not there, but still physically there. I don't know what his life was like after that. I was a senior in college at that time. So that would have been Yes, I was 21.
But like you said, that you can still feel the loss. And you're doing some repairing in a certain way of allowing
Yeah, I
the
mean,
openness of your grandchildren and other and those of us too to hear your experience and to know you.
right. It's he and I were like oil and water. Okay. He lived with my family for 8 years after his wife died. And he was the most bigoted man I ever knew. Okay. Absolutely. And he was actually too old for World War One. He never got in the military because he was already too old by the time World War One came around. And my other grandfather was too young for World War One and too old for World War Two. But he worked. My maternal grandfather worked for 50 years on the Pennsylvania Railroad. And so the only thing I have from him is his gold watch that he was given when he retired. And so there's so many things. I mean, he lived a difficult life. His fiance in 1918 died from the Spanish flu, along with her 4 sisters. All 5 girls died on one weekend in 1918. And as a result of that, he married my grandmother instead a couple of years later. And therefore I exist. Okay. My other grandfather lost his business in the crash of 1929. I don't know what he did, but I don't know much about what he did in the 30s, except that when I knew him, he was a traveling salesman, and he was the classic Willie Loman from O'Neill's play. But he did one amazing thing, and that was that he wasn't well fixed politically, so he couldn't get my father into the military academies by political appointment. But he went to see his congressman, and his congressman said, well, if you want to get your son into the Naval Academy, then you need to have him join the Navy and to start college someplace else, and then move to the Naval Academy, get selected from the fleet, so-called. And so that's what my father did. He joined the Navy in 1940. And so he was on the first ship that sank the first U-boat before the beginning of World War II. And as a result, in part because of that and because of my grandfather's research, he got into the Naval Academy and spent the 3 years from the fall of 42 to May of 45. Although he was in the class of 46, he graduated in 1945 because there were 5 classes at the Naval Academy. They graduated after 3 years. They were pushed through. And so my father went to Penn for his freshman year of college, and then went to the Naval Academy for the next 3 years, and was commissioned in 45, even though he was technically of the class of 46. But because my grandfather did that, he got my father into the Naval Academy, and I'm probably here because of that too, because my father didn't serve anymore in World War II, not at all. And so anyway, those are long stories. And my grandmothers I know even less about. Of course, they were lovely ladies and so on. My paternal grandfather, I used to sort of equate her with Queen Elizabeth II. She looked like the Queen. They were sort of contemporaries by age. And, of course, there was nothing that had nothing to do with anything except that as a child, that was my impression. My maternal grandmother, the main thing I remember about her was that she wore a bustle. So, and in the summer of 52, we spent a summer with them before we moved to Alaska. And so I remember her and her bustle from that experience in 52. And I'm blessed because, in one way, because my lifetime was chopped up so much by the Navy that I know almost to the day when certain events happened in my life. I can tell you the dates, pretty much. I can't tell you when my mother drove across the country with 3 little kids, and I was the eldest at 5, and my sister was.
We just missed the last part of that, Skip. If you feel you could repeat it easily, you you left off that she was driving across country with 3 little kids. You were the oldest at 5.
And she drove from Philadelphia to Seattle and then waited 2 months in a little rat-infested motel until she could get shipping to take us to Kodiak. So we had to wait until there was a ship that was going from Seattle to Kodiak, and then we could go by that ship. And she told this story of when that ship was leaving Seattle. There was the Army band was there, and people were throwing streamers and all sorts of stuff as they were leaving Seattle. And she was telling all these Army wives, oh, well, just wait until you see the welcome that we get when we arrive in Kodiak. And we arrived in Kodiak on a rainy day. And the ship was pulled up to the pier by a tugboat, I suppose. And it was pouring rain. And one of these big hawser lines was thrown down off the ship. And one solitary sailor comes out, grabs the hawser, and puts it over the cleat. That was her Navy welcome. Sorry.
Well, I love how that story expresses another version of how your mom was beyond making the best of things. When she came home knowing, when they said, you have cancer, she goes, oh, cancer. I haven't tried that yet.
Right. Yeah, she did that. I mean, little bit further on that Kodiak story was that my father couldn't get
I'm going to
housing.
check out. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thanks,
take care
everyone.
now.
Yeah.
My father couldn't get housing on the base initially. He had to wait for housing. And so we had to live in the town of Kodiak, which was mainly Aleut Eskimos, people of the Aleutian Islands, and who were mainly king crab fishermen. And my father takes us to this, what was a skid shack. It was a 3-room shack that had skids on the bottom of it. And it's the kind of shack that they use up in Minnesota when they go out on a frozen lake for ice fishing. And it had one space heater in the living room. There was a kerosene heater and, a bathroom with a little kitchen with a bathroom off of it and my parents' room. And so my brother and I were on bunk beds in the living room. And my mother and father slept in their room with my infant sister. And that lasted 4 months. It was quite an experience in many ways. I remember many things from that time, but I'm not going to bore everyone here with that. So,
Not boring, Skip, but we are coming close to time. It's not boring
right,
at all.
yep. No, I'm going to call a halt here because I have a guest from another part of my life coming in today, and I need to pull myself together for that. So anyway, we'll see you next week. We will. The next chapter is DS2, which means day 2. And again, this is part of the Anchorite story. But I mean, I just think the first part of this Anchorite story is so powerful with the nobody can say what the meaning of a string of words is. That hit me right between the eyes. So anyway, peace.